Hi, Brett here. Just wanted to let you know that this is an interview episode, which means we are not policing language as much as we normally would self-police. So I know some folks tend to listen with their little ones in the room on some sort of Amazon device or whatever. You might want to give a pass on that for this episode and move on to whatever you're going to listen to next, and come back and listen to this one in your earpods. Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man ready to put four to the floor, double clutch, and drive off into the Texas sunset.
Tim Longo.
Yep.
Yes, I am.
You sure are, man.
Except when the physics bug happens.
Well,
I'm no, sorry, I had to. Low blow. I know. We'll talk about it. We have two guests on to talk about that. So I am very happy to introduce two guests today for our podcast, which is a bonus episode follow-on to Interstate 76. So I'm so excited about these. Yes, you can hear them in the background. So first off, I will introduce Sean Vesce. Is a veteran game developer from the early 90s, though I've never asked him exactly how it started, so hopefully we can talk about that today. Back at Activision in 94, worked on games like Pitfall, Mayan Adventure, MechWarrior 2, and Interstate 76, which we'll talk about today. But yes, I'm not sure what happened before that. After that, he founded 20 After 1 and later rebooted the classic company Cinemaware, which is a childhood favorite of mine, or teen age favorite of mine. So maybe we talk a little bit about that. Before moving to Crystal Dynamics as a creative director and later studio head, working on Project Snowblind, the Tomb Raider Legend, Underworld, and Anniversary, which is where I met him. And later on, he went on to Eline Media as studio director and creative director on Never Alone, which is a BAFTA award-winning game, working with indigenous communities to bring their stories to life through games. Amazing game there. Since then, he then founded Colaby and then Very, Very Spaceship, which is currently still going on, specializes in AR gaming and other things, working with companies like Niantic. But then he just doesn't stop. So now he's also started yet another company focused on gaming insights and playtesting software and experiences for developers to gain insights about their games through their systems, called Live Aware, which is the name of the company. So he just never stops. Welcome, Sean, to the podcast.
Oh, so great to be here, Tim and Brett.
Awesome. Now I'm going to go on to Zack Norman, who I'm meeting for the first time today via this podcast, but heard so much about from Sean over the years. Also going back a long way, as he has done many great things over the years, also seemingly a serial entrepreneur, which you're about to hear about. I was flabbergasted to look at your LinkedIn, Zack. He started back at Activision in 94 as well, it looked like. Also on MechWarrior and Interstate 76, and then moved to EA, or rather Jamdat, which I think became EA eventually in the mobile space for many years as a senior VP and co-founder there. But then I think you left the games industry around that point, apparently setting the speed record for electric motorcycles.
That's right, out of Bonneville.
Okay, we'll hear about that in a second. And then founding companies, everything from phone texting alternatives to XR-based meditation.
Yep.
And currently even lawn solutions for dogs who live in apartments, which as a dog lover, I'm like, what? That's amazing.
Yeah.
So who knows what he's up to now? Welcome to the podcast, Zack.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and tell the history as I remember it.
Of course, as we said in pre-show, neither of us have good memories, so we'll see.
I mean, it's fine for this game if it's an alternate history, so don't worry about that either.
Yeah, right, exactly. So one of the, as you guys know, we talked pre-show and kind of over email about this. One of the things that we know the listeners like and we like as well is just kind of like, because this podcast is about talking to old school devs about old school classic, retro games and games that influenced the games of today. Everyone kind of likes to know how you got into it. So I'll start with Sean, but Sean, can you give us a little bit about your journey to Activision, I guess? And
oh man,
yeah, give us the truncated version if you want, and then you can hand it over to Zack when you're done if you want to.
Sounds good. I was an Atari 2600 baby, so grew up on Activision games on the cartridge. David Cartwright, Stephen Cartwright and David Crane.
Crane, yes, yeah, me too.
And seeing those manuals in the back of the of those games where they would say, like, I had this much fun making these, as I hope you do playing, and it was one of those things where, like, I had from a very early age knew that I wanted to make games for a living. So grew up on a Commodore 64, taught myself programming, got into school, studied art, and answered an ad in some Usenet for Activision. Was hiring for a production coordinator on the Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure, and so showed up for an interview with oil paintings in one hand and a dot matrix printout of code that I had written for a game in the other. And managed to land the job, yeah. So it was an interesting path in. But at the time, there were no game designers, and I, having done a lot of coding and done a lot of art, ended up kind of settling right in as a bridge between those two disciplines. And so, it was incredible journey.
Holy cow, Usenet. Those are the days.
Yeah, look it up, kids.
What was that, Brett?
I said, look it up, kids.
Yeah, right. What is that?
Commodore 64. Did you did you grow up on what systems did you grow up on?
Well, so I was more on the IBM side. So yeah, but Atari, I've talked about it on the podcast a lot, actually. Pitfall 2, obviously Pitfall 1, but Pitfall 2 specifically being one of my favorite, and Adventure being two games that really influenced me over the years. So Activision for sure, that the 2600 days is like in my blood. Absolutely. River Raid, yes. And you're totally right on the manuals. The manuals were like, that was the thing, you poured over those things because they had all the artwork in them and stuff.
I don't want to jump ahead too much, but we should talk about the manual on MechWarrior 2 because it was bitchin'.
Do it, yes. Yeah, please bring that back up. Yeah, exactly. Because it hits the genre for both games, right? The manual was important for these kinds of games. So we definitely should come back. So what about you, Zack? What was your... Did you also answer the same Usenet?
No. In fact, my origin story is a little bit weirder than that. Like Vesce was like, he had a vision. Like, I remember I was highly respectful of Sean because he was like, I want to be a video game maker. I didn't know that people made video games. Yeah. I thought they just showed up on my computer. I mean, literally, like, I was like, I'd never really thought about it. I mean, I knew, if I'm being facetious, but like, I knew that there were this cadre of people out there who were talented, and I was not one of them. Okay. I was basically, my story was I was studying acting. I have a fine arts degree in acting. And my dad is a screenwriter, and I kind of transitioned from acting to screenwriting, and I was writing scripts like for Hollywood, being a Hollywood guy. And so one of Bobby's visions was he was going to take Mediagenic and then take the stock and relaunch Activision, and he was going to do it in LA, and he was going to marry, the traditional video game, what was then the traditional video game business with Hollywood, right? So they approached me because I got this call from a friend of mine who was like, Activision's looking for a writer, and I think you'd be good. Now, back up a little bit. I was a gamer, but like I was kind of I grew up in Intellivision, and I had, certainly Ataris, and I had a Pong machine. I mean, I had a series of consoles, but I didn't really start to game until I was in college, and I got my first PC AT essentially, right? Like 512 RAM,
Yep.
right? And I was playing like SimCity and games like that, and really into it. And so I came back to LA, and I was writing these screenplays, but I needed a machine to write them on, so I built a machine. I built a computer. It was like a 386 or something like that at the time.
Nice.
So I was building machines. And so I get this call from a friend of mine. They're like, Activision is looking for Hollywood writers to help them with their projects. Would you like to come in? And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And now I didn't know. Well, okay, so I'm trying to figure out how best to dramatically tell this story. So I get the call. I come in, and I met with Alan Gershenfeld and Howard Marks, who were the head of the LA studio. And they called me in, and they said, "Hey, we like your writing sample that you submitted. Do you have any video game experience?" And I'm like, "No, not really." And he's like, "They're like, is there anything?" I'm like, "Well, I can make a computer." I'm like, "Okay, that's kind of cool. Like, you got the, I could put a computer together. I could slide the video card." And this is kind of rare back then, right? And then they were like, "Anything else? Anything you can do in the video game? Like anything related to video games?" And I'm like, "Well, I can make levels with the Doom editor."
Oh, that was it.
And I'm like, "Is that relevant?" And they're like, "Yeah,
You're hired.
yeah, that's relevant." And so they're like, "Show us your levels." And I think I made a football game. Did you ever see that, Sean?
Yes.
I made a football game, and it was the quarterback. Basically, on the line of scrimmage, there was this line of scrimmage, and I used the Doom editor. And the quarterback would grab the rocket launcher, okay, and the receiver would grab the infinite armor power up, and the rusher would grab the punch. Remember the mega punch?
Yeah.
And then I think the other defender also had the mega punch. And the idea was like, if I could shoot the receiver, it was a reception.
Yeah.
Right, and he wouldn't die because he had the infinite armor on, and then he could run into the right. That was what they were like. They were like, when can you start? So it was pretty funny. And it was funny too because just to fast forward a little bit into the job, when I met Vesce, I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's like on top of it." He's like, they were fighting fires, and we'll go into the whole history of that game if you're interested. But I was literally like, "Sean, what do you guys want me to write?" And Sean was like, "I don't know, dude. Sit tight, and you figure it out."
It'll become apparent.
Okay. So then I started just writing game stuff, like interesting game stuff, and it ended up, much of it ended up going into the game. So, but yeah, that was my origin story.
What are you saying, Sean?
Oh, I remember meeting Zack the first time, and just like,
oh, please,
so dynamic. He was like, came in, he had an amazing knowledge of games. He's completely being modest here. An amazing knowledge of all PC games. He's a huge BattleTech fan. We were in the middle of the biggest fire possible with MechWarrior. We were a ninja team brought in. FASA was going to pull the license, and we had I think it was 6 months to show that we could get more than 2 mechs on the screen or something. And so we got brought in as this ninja team to try to write it. And Zack showed up, and he had at his fingertips complete knowledge of the entire BattleTech universe.
Oh, that's right. I actually forgot a chapter in the interview. That's right. Where, because again, this is my drug-addled brain here. Vesce was like, no, not Vesce. What's his name? Alan was like, do you have any domain? Do you know anything about giant robots? Right? They were kind of going to put me on the mech team, but I didn't have any idea what they were doing. Right? He's like, they're like, "Do you know anything about giant robots?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I mean, I know. And they're like, "Do you know anything about FASA or BattleTech?" And I'm like, "Well, I got to the semifinals at RISD on the tabletop game."
Oh no! Oh no!
And they're like, "What?"
Yeah, you left out a pretty important part there.
That's right. Yes, I didn't tell. I don't tell that story very often, so I don't have it locked and loaded.
Yeah.
So that was one of the parts. Is Sean's right. I kind of was the perfect hire for that game because I knew the world pretty well, and I knew how the robots worked and all that stuff. In fact, wait, okay, I don't want to derail the whole conversation, and you can cut this out if I'm talking too much. But check this out. So before I got the job, I went into Egghead Software where I would buy
yes, that's right. I remember this.
Right?
Yep.
And on the shelf, there was this box, and it said MechWarrior 2, The Clans on it. This is before I got the job. All right.
Re-release.
And so it was because, again, Vesce was talking. It was like the team had been working on the game and they'd been failing. They'd been failing to deliver. There wasn't a lot of traction. The licensor had cold feet. They were going to draw the license away, and they had like a clause where they could shut us down on the option. Yep. And so this box had been sitting on the shelf for a while, right? At Egghead, literally like 3 or 4 years. Like, I think the joke was that MechWarrior 2 had best of show at E3. No, yeah, was it E3?
Yeah,
no, CES.
CES at the
yes,
time,
that's
maybe.
right. It wasn't even E3 yet. Best of show at CES like 3 years in a row, right? Because it was not coming out. Yeah. So I see the box, and it's an empty box up on a shelf at Egghead, and I'm like, I want that game. And the guy was like, well, those guys at Activision are taking their time making that game, but I'll put your name on the list. And then I forgot, okay, that I'd done that. I ended up getting hiring, and then Sean and I made the game in like 6 to 9 months, whatever it was. We released it, and I get a phone call. Hey, your MechWarrior 2 came in. And I'm like, oh, shit. I told the guy on the phone, I'm like, dude, I made that game. He's like, no, you didn't make the game. I remember you coming in. You're one of the 9 people on my list that I called. And I'm like, no, dude, I made that game, and I'll come in and I'll prove it, and I'll show you in the manual. And sure enough, I opened it up in front of him, and I showed him my name.
Oh, man. Dude, that was the craziest time because we were locked in. I think the total time we were on that project was 11 months, but we were literally 7 days a week. Like, we basically lived out of the office. I don't remember having – we would show up early. We would work all the way through. Generally, we would game till like midnight, 1 o'clock. Then we'd start the next shift and just keep it rolling. And it was like a full on firefight to get that thing done.
It was.
We loved it. We loved it.
We loved it. It was so much fun.
We have so many. I mean, if you do get a chance to listen to any interviews, I know you've listened to a couple, but there's so many similar stories to that of that era, right?
You guys must have experienced that at LucasArts, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. And it's not as much the firefighting. I mean, there definitely the firefighting happened, but just like those days, right? The early development days of those times, and you know, as you were talking about MechWarrior at that time, I do have a memory of that sort of like extended period because it was a little bit of an infamous game because it was announced when it was. Yep. And Zack, your point about the strategy that Activision was trying to employ, and MechWarrior being one of the ones because it was a licensed game and all this stuff. Of course, I didn't know about the disappointment that FOSSA had and all that stuff. So like, yeah, that is a short amount of time to pull a game like that together. Holy cow! Especially a simulation kind of based game.
You know who was instrumental in turning it around was Tim Morton, who
what?
Stormfront. Tim was part of the Tiger team, so it was like Tim, myself, Zack. There was like a really small group of people who they stuffed us in a corner and they were like, "See what you can do." And Tim, at the time, this thing was a completely custom engine, and it was running in like DOS protected mode or something. Brett would probably be able to give some color on this, but like they only had access to like, hundreds of kilobytes of memory, and so they could only render 2 mechs on screen at the same time, which was not going to fly. And Tim was the one who, I remember like for 2 weeks he didn't come out, he didn't shower, he was like completely looked like a homeless guy, like trying to figure out how to get out of the DOS protected mode, and he cracked it. And I remember the demo, we came in and he had it was like 3 mechs it was like 3 on 3, and it was a revelation because suddenly you had a real battlefield, playing out. And that was the turning point. I remember they literally flew FASA in to see that work, and that was like, okay, we'll give you an extension to see if you can get this thing to market. So Tim deserves a huge, he was one of the ones who saved it.
Yeah, I know. I know Tim through one of our Twin Sons investors. So, so I need to now find a reason to get Tim on the podcast.
Oh, dude, he'll tell you some stories.
Yeah, he's also old school. Yeah, at Blizzard, and so. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you both for that. And just as an aside, Zack, I'm also a theater major, so just. So I also knew nothing about game development when I got into games. So.
It's kind of a sister business in a way.
It is totally.
It's like they're cousins, maybe distant sometimes, but not so distant.
Yeah, no, I feel like Brett can confirm this, but I feel like I have brought it up before in that I was directing and acting, so the directing part, which is a lot of what I do today, it applies much more than I would have thought, for sure. Yeah,
sure.
So I agree with you.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so Mech Warrior, yeah, I had forgotten about kind of that and didn't know about the drama there. So should we transition to Interstate 76 then from there, or how do we close up on the Mech Warrior 2 part of it? Like, is there, because we want to get to Interstate 76 especially, but how did the two bridge?
I mean, Zack, before we started recording, Zack mentioned that like this era was so formative for both of us and such an amazing time. But I mean, for me, my fondest memory was collaborating with Zack, because he's such a brilliant creative, and he was such a joy to work with and be around, and the energy that he brought on these projects were like, it just fueled my fire to do what the part that I was there for. But I think Interstate 76 was really born out of that collaboration and that partnership, and so when MechWarrior shipped, it ended up being a big success, and it was a turning point for Activision, because I think it legitimized Bobby's vision and stuff.
Totally.
And what was interesting was we kind of finished up that project, and they were like, well, what do you want to do? And so Zack and I went away for a little while, and we were thinking about different things, and I'll let Zack introduce kind of how the genesis of Interstate 76. But I think through the credibility that we had gained from successfully delivering Mech, we were able to kind of write our own ticket, which was really rare, and it opened up a space for something as unique as I-76.
First of all, thank you, Sean, for such kind words. And I will. I'm not. It's not platitudes to turn around on you and say, you guys, when I walked in to Activision, I mean, I think I was wearing a suit the first day, like I was just a douchebag. And I met this guy, Sean. I was like, I had never met a really technical person. Like I'd never really met somebody who understands technology in a way that I never probably could ever. And so he was the glue that held the whole team together. Meaning, yeah, there was engineering involved, and there was individuals who acted as the glue on the other side of the team. Sure, like Tim was like a nucleus of the engineering group, but Sean was the nucleus of the whole team. And like, if there were tools that needed to be made, he would talk to the designers, and we'd make the tools, and the things would get done. And again, you got to understand, this is when we wrote our own engines, guys. Right?
Yeah.
You got to understand, like, that's a different era. The era, I mean, this is like the time when, it's like akin to, like, imagine making a movie, but not only do you have to write a script, and it has to be good, and the story has to be good, and the actors need to be good, and the casting needs to be good, and the scenes, the lighting needs to be good, but you have to make a camera, and the camera has to be good, and you have to make a movie theater, and the movie theater has to be good, right? Like, it's like all that shit, right? We were making everything. So like Sean, I was always amazed, and I think that that's one of the reasons why our partnership was so strong, is because, I think we overlapped in some ways, but we also were kind of specialists in our own realms.
Yeah.
In terms of the way Interstate came about, I think it was actually, we basically, if I remember correctly, we were smart enough to know that we should stick to vehicle combat. In other words, we had an engine that did a thing, right? And the engine was pushing, relatively individually high poly count things around a terrain map.
Yeah.
And high poly count being 80 polys.
Right. 82 polygons, right? I mean, relatively compared to the background, which was like 6 polygons, right? But yeah. By the way, I actually, a couple of years ago, I went back and I played MechWarrior 2 in emulation, and I was sad. I was like, oh God, I remember it being so much better than this. But anyway, compared to modern games. But no, so I think we basically, Sean and I were like, we agreed in that philosophy. Let's think of all the different kinds of, games we could do, and we thought about like Japanese like samurai games, and maybe on horseback or something. And then, I wanted to. At one point, I was like really into the idea of meshing up like like a World War II flight combat sim with like dragons. Where like, what if the Germans like flew like did the Battle of Britain on the backs of dragons, right? Like so there'd be these armored with like dragons holding like bombs in their claws and dropping them on London. You know what I mean? That kind of shit.
Oh man!
And, like Americans were flying in eagles, giant eagles, and anyway,
we were sim hounds though. Like we were all in the.
Yeah, we were playing like, Wing Commander, and I was, Aces of the Pacific, and, all those games. And so we were into that stuff. But I think one of the things that I was super passionate about at the time was cars. I always have been. Yep. And I was like, and I was actually in the market. I was like actually out buying a muscle cars. I wanted to go buy like a Charger or Challenger or like some kind of Mopar or maybe a Mustang or something. And then I think Sean and I started talking about like, what if we made a game that was all about muscle cars with guns on them? And then Sean was like, I like that idea. And I don't know how it came about, but we're like, but I think we could do a really cool 70s vibe to it. Yep.
The thing that I think after MechWarrior, I remember having a conversation with you where it was, one of the things that set Mech apart was it did have a soul, right? It had a vibe, and it was a complete world, with the storytelling and the mission design, and we wanted to carry that forward. Like, what to its logical extent could we create a game that was literally filled with soul? And funk music was so. It was so influential for us, and that combination was so powerful, the muscle cars. And I think at the time too, we were, having been kids of the 70s, sort of in the 90s, sort of reflecting back on a lot of the blaxploitation films and Starsky and Hutch and all that stuff. And so all of that kind of congealed into a pitch that,
and, I will add this, it wasn't cool. Like the 70s was not cool. Like now it's kind of cool. Like it was not, like nobody was thinking it would be a good idea to make a game in the 70s, like a period piece in the 70s. That was not a popular idea.
You're ahead of your time.
That was a ways off, for sure. Because there have been, exploitation films, throughout the last maybe 10 or 15 years, but back in the late 90s, that was not a thing.
It's too recent, probably. Yeah.
Yeah,
the cycle hadn't happened yet.
There was something about the the hair and whatever, and it was in disco. I think like there was still a hangover in the culture. I mean, grunge was what was current, right? So it's like, how do you go back to something like the 70s from that, or at least people remember?
Because we'd been away from it long enough. In other words, we'd been away from it long enough that it wasn't like trying to still be relevant.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It was a cycle that was ready to start coming back. You know, I mean, and again, I think that you even see when you follow up games like, I mean, again, what take this for what it's worth, but we saw strains of this kind of design stuff show up in GTA. You know what I mean? Like, and so it was, early GTA, 1 or 2 or whatever. And so I think. Yeah, it was. We were out there, certainly out on a bleeding edge creatively.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that to Brett's point about like when the game came out, so I got into development in '96, and Brett I think '98, right?
Yeah, very beginning '98.
Yeah, very beginning. So like year and a half later, and we were at LucasArts at the time. And to your great point, Zach, about those days, which we talk a lot about on the podcast. We were also working in proprietary engines, and like the struggle of having to do it all kind of stuff. To your point, and I remember when this game came out, because of LucasArts, we have the X-Wing TIE Fighter, the Totally Games, like Totally Games being the developer Larry Holland, who we had on as well. Talking about those days, we played TIE Fighter for the podcast many years ago. And so Sims, and then both of us met working on Star Wars Starfighter, which was a console sort of sim influenced action game. And so Sims were also in our blood as well, coming from, because LucasArts did a lot of that stuff. But this one stood out so much, and I didn't get to finish it back in the day. I did play it, but I didn't get to finish it. And ironically, I didn't get to this time either, so we can talk about that later. But on the series that we we do multiple episodes on each game. We talked a lot about that. It was such a signature title, and I'm obviously I have you on, so maybe I'm tooting your horn on this stuff, but like as far as like being a bold concept, that in a time when you had a lot, we mentioned Doom already. There was starting to be a lot of similarly themed games, if you know what I mean, right? Across PCs, especially PC gaming, driven by id largely, then Epic. And it was hard to stand out. It's harder now, of course, but this one just like, wow, this is something I would not have expected. And you mentioned earlier, Sean, that you got to write your own ticket because of your successes there, which was, rare, but also seems like it must have been a key, because I just don't see how this game would have come to pass otherwise. But then because of that risk and because you had such a clear vision for it, both of you, I think that's why people still, it does still have a cult following, and people still play it today, in fact, too, So kudos to you on that. And I think that it's great to hear. The other thing we talked about, just so you know, too, if you didn't listen to the episodes, is that being developers at the time too, we knew that constraints were really important. And the fact, like you said, Zach, that it's like we knew what our engine could do. This is our constraints. This is but even within that, you didn't go after another mech game. I would have loved to have ridden a dragon in World War II, though, just so you know. but you found something even within those constraints that is very memorable.
I think that Activision didn't have the license to do more mech BattleTech games. Is that right, Zach?
Well, I mean, put it this way: I don't exactly remember. Well, okay.
Well, they could do mercenaries.
They're smart enough to have made another game if they had the license.
Yeah, right. Yep. So that was again sort of a constraint, right? The necessity of going to original IP at that point. Yeah.
That for us, I remember that being very clearly the goal. Like, we wanted to not work on somebody else's IP. We wanted to do something original, and we wanted to do something that would be unique and memorable. And Zach, do you recall the story of us when we pitched that to Alan Gershenfeld? Do you remember?
I mean, I have vague. Tell it. I'd have vague memories of it, but
I remember we had this opportunity that they gave us a few weeks. We polished up a pitch and we went and pitched to Alan, and he kind of looked at us like really like I remember thinking like he thinks we're totally crazy, and he said, it's a good idea. I want you to go back and I want you to think of 9 more ideas, and then think of the 10th idea, and the 10th idea I want you to come back and pitch to us. I don't know if you remember this. And we walked out of that room and in the elevator, and we're like, sorry, you can bleep this out, Brett, but we're like, fuck that. We're going to make Interstate 76. Come hell or high water, we're going to do this. And so I think we got out of that with the resolve that we were going to figure out a way to get this done. And part of it was that that use of constraints. So like we pitched this on the premise that we would be using Mech 2's engine, and that would be a huge time saver. And that was part of what got us over the finish line. The other thing was we ended up like cobbling together a demo and having like a party, of which the owner's guide that I posted on LinkedIn this week was part of that, like the handout for that. And I remember winning over Scott Lehman and Bobby and those guys, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Now, so would you say that that you actually did get a big leg up, or was there enough different in doing cars over your giant robots that it was a problem?
Oh, it was a complete disaster trying to leverage Mech 2 engine, because this thing was like, it was literally an engine that had been cobbled together and rewritten and like stitched over the. I think the total production was like 4 years. We were on the last sort of like that last sort of 10 months trying to
save the
this thing
bacon.
ready. Yeah, save the bacon. And so the engine itself was a complete mess, and I think we spent the first like 4 or 5 months trying to leverage it. And the super secret, which I think I can finally reveal 30 something years later, is we ended up like without telling anybody starting from scratch. We started a completely new engine and didn't mention it to anybody. And we didn't change the timeline. We were like, we can totally do this. We can totally make a new engine, and we can totally make all new pipeline and get it all to work. And so I was surprised when I learned, Tim and Brett, that you tracked down, and Zack will be surprised. These guys tracked down Julio. You remember Julio Jimenez?
Oh, I can do that.
I
can do that.
Julio was like this rock star engineer from, was he Colombian or from?
Hard to say.
I can't remember, but from South America. And any idea that we brought to him, we would say like, Julio, and Zack would go in and be like, okay, Julio, we're thinking about doing this like dynamic terrain system where it tessellates the polygons like in real time, so we can get like really high definition up front and low polys in back, and it'll render. And Julio said, "What, Zack?
I can do it.
I can do that." Any problem we brought to him, the guy would figure it out.
We did a bunch of really innovative stuff with the tech, and you're right. It's like so it's interesting because before you make a car game, it's very naive to think that a robot game and a car game are similar. I mean, they are similar in some levels, but like Sean and I were wrestling with these things that we'd never thought of, like if a car is traveling at 100 miles an hour inside the simulation and you're trying to figure out if it's going to collide with another car, and you have to optimize that collision, right? Because I can't do collision detection every frame. This is software, right? Like I can't do that every frame on every vehicle every time. You have to basically do these wonderful things that Sean and his team figured out how to do, like to optimize the game so it would actually run, right? And trying to make these vehicles that move very, very fast and do physics on different kinds of terrain types and all this other stuff. It was pretty magical. And we were making it up as we went along. Like one of the things that I remember having a conversation with Julio where I was like, remember how we talked about how we're going to do the roads?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, Sean was like, well, we'll use tiles, and that's the way we would normally do it. And I'm like, yeah, but we can't get the like really, really subtly dynamic, flowing and undulating road systems with tiles because it just doesn't. We can't have enough resolution. There's like not enough memory. There's not enough tiles, right? And like so, we figured out. We were like, let's like trace a line through the world and then cut the terrain grid into tessellated polygons based on that line, and then do a smoothing algorithm on it, and then do a banking algorithm on it, and we'll make all the roads that way. And then Dave White would go in and make a tool that like you went into some sort of Photoshop thing and let us like lay out the roads with splines, and it worked. You know what I mean? There was no instruction manual. There was nothing. We were making it up.
Wow.
That was not an easy game. Simulation, as you know, Tim, is like, and Brett, they're like, we were geeking out every day just in terms of how deep the well went with like collision zones and stats and weapons ordnance and their flight paths, and like we were having a blast.
You can tell from the game too, because of the detail there. It's interesting. Yeah, thank you, Sean, for breaking finally 30 years later that news about the engine. Right?
Don't tell Bobby.
An exclusive here, but because we definitely, as I think you did listen to the episodes, Sean, but we did definitely made that assumption that, of course, MechWarrior engine was the cornerstone for this idea and breaking it forward, bringing it forward. So
it was a good plan. We were able to rapidly prototype, and that I think got us the green light on it because we were able to show.
We couldn't have done it without we could have done it without the story, and we couldn't have done it without the demo.
Yeah. So good segue. So for influences, you mentioned some of the film influences. You mentioned the time. You mentioned music. Like, can you two talk about some of the story, and the characters are very memorable. There's a poetry button. I mean, there's so many great, like, as far as like a vision goes, it's so cohesive. And of course, yeah, mech games, like we get it, robots, and like, there's FOSSA had its thing going already. Like you said, Zach, you even competed in the tabletop or what have you. So that was like a known thing. But creating a world and an alt history, etc., from scratch must have been super fun. Like, how did you guys go about that?
How did we go about that, Sean? I think we basically, so we worked backwards, I think, from the technical requirements. I mean, what we just told you, like we knew what the constraints were because we said, well, we want to do muscle cars with guns.
Yeah.
And then I think at some point I said, let's make it a TV show. Like, let's make it like as if the game was a movie. That's why it's called Interstate 76, because that's like Airport 77.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You remember those movies, like those disaster movies? And it was like
movies.
where they had this thing during the 70s where they put the year that it was made in the title.
Yeah.
That's where it came from. Like Interstate 76 was like the year it took place, right?
Right.
And so everything creatively just worked back from that thing. Like, what would this be if it was a TV show? You know, that theme that we made was like, you know, like that whole funky beginning was all like the intro to a TV show. And if you watch the game, the way that the game begins with that soundtrack, it's literally made with credits. It's a credit sequence from a TV show that's fictitious, you know? And so we basically just made characters that you would find in kind of maybe a little bit more crass and kind of dark, almost a feature film combination of a feature film and a blaxploitation film and like an action TV show like A-Team or, you know, one of those. And it all kind of came together that way.
Awesome. Yeah. It's oh, go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say in that production in particular, music was a driving force as well. So we were, you know, they had put us in the corner kind of office area, like segmented away from everybody else within Activision. And Zack had a tremendous collection of 1970s funk, and we would play that. And that music was a real inspiration. That genre was a real inspiration. It was the sort of the heartbeat for a lot of things. We would come in and play that, and a lot of things just sort of naturally came out of that. Kelly Rogers, actually, who was I think he was a producer at the time, came down and he was like, I want to produce this soundtrack, this original soundtrack. And he was really one of the ones who was an advocate for that. And he was the one. Kelly got the band together, which was like, it was Aaron Salazar, he was a bassist for Third Eye Blind, and he pulled together this ensemble group. And I remember the first cuts that they produced, and they were showing us out of the demo reels, and Zach and I were just like, oh, this couldn't be more perfect.
So good.
It's just amazing. And
like we knew we had something special when we heard the music. Like we were like, okay, this is going to be really, 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 really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping the music would come up because in the Discord community, Brett, I'm going to forget who brought it up, but it had come up. People knew about the Third Eye Blind bassist. I'm forgetting his name, but and the sort of focus on. I mean, did the soundtrack I think came out as well? Like it was definitely a real corner, like a pillar of the product for sure.
I remember even in that first demo that we built, like even from that point we had selected background music, which just set the tone, and it really just helped to make the whole thing cohesive. But yeah, Kelly did a phenomenal job on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the TV show reference is a good one too, and that now I'm thinking about sort of the mission interstitials and things like that. It felt like the missions almost were sort of like episodes of a show. Thinking back about it, I don't know why that didn't dawn on me before, but that really does ring true now. On the mission design stuff, like, can you talk about, if you remember, and of course you probably had separate mission designers, so you may not remember because you weren't doing it yourself, but okay, there's some laughter.
We did them.
We did them.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I mean,
okay.
The team was like 12 or 13 people total. At its peak, dude. So this is
Great. Awesome. Okay, good. Well, then, I mean, I wanted to ask about that because one of the we've talked about it with every sim-oriented game we've played, and because we're the kind of podcast that goes deeper into this stuff than most podcasts because we're all developers. And I myself, being a level and mission designer from the past, like have a specific interest in this. But one of the kind of notoriously difficult things, in my opinion, about simulation, mission-based simulation games, the mission design side of it is the sort of like limited tools you have to make missions kind of constantly surprising the player, right? Because it's usually some sort of vehicular thing that you're having to kind of
you have things are arriving, things are leaving, things are trying to destroy other things, things are trying to escort other things. Like, I could probably reel off like the sort of basic bits that you have to work with, and then that's normally the missions in terms of like events you can fire into the sim. It's like some new guys arrive, or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'll point out, but I do want to circle back a little bit to influences because let me just say this really quickly. I want you guys to understand, dude, TIE Fighter and X-Wing were extremely influential for me at that time.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a major fan, and we called them cutscenes because you guys called them cutscenes.
Yeah, LucasArts. It wasn't us, but that's that LucasArts coined that. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Meaning when we would do a cutscene and make one of those scenes in there.
Yep.
It was coming from my experience with X-Wing, quite frankly. Yep. Like, right. And I'm going to I'm going to talk about missions in a second, but just let me digress for a second.
No, please do. This
is kind of an interesting thing. So I was really bummed because when we were making Mech, it was called MechWarrior 2: The Clans, and there were 6 clans, okay? And we ended up cutting all but 2 of them from the game. And I was really bummed out, but I talked with, I forget who it was. It might have been Tim Schafer, okay? Mm-hmm. Or somebody else I know Tim was not necessarily on the TIE Fighter stuff, but he was up there and he knew stuff. Or some of the other guys who were working on I was up at the CGDC when it had a C in front of it because it was a computer game developers conference.
Yep.
Which, by the way, we have to circle back to that because there's some great stories. But the point of it is that one of the guys from X-Wing told me, we were a little bit bummed because we had to cut TIE Fighter from X-Wing when we released X-Wing. In other words, the first SKU was supposed to be both sides.
Yeah.
And then I learned this valuable lesson when we were confronted with that same thing at Activision. I had no idea as a player that it used to have other functionality that was cut.
Yeah.
Right? And so that became a valuable lesson. Anyway, so like those of you who are aspiring and making games out there, don't be afraid to cut stuff to focus on the good stuff because your players don't know what you cut.
Exactly. Yes. That's a great lesson.
But going on to the level design thing. So one thing about Interstate that you got to keep in mind is it's not a arena-based car combat game. All right? And that helped us with the level design. Because our competition was like Carmageddon or Twisted Metal or,
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we talked about those, but that's a great point is fundamentally different.
Totally different. Because we had the ability to say, okay, these guys are hiding behind this butte. Or you got to fill up at the gas station. Remember the gas parade, Sean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what we would do is we would make like a mission around like, okay, we're getting gas, right? And like you got to get gas and the car's going to sit there for a while and you got to, and then you got to like defend like Taurus while he fills up or whatever. I don't even remember what the mission was. But it was funny because, we would make special music for that level and then we'd make a special piece of geometry. Literally, it was a gas station. It was a circus-themed gas station called Gas Parade, right? And it was hysterical. That was the other thing. We were sending up everything. Like everything was like a little bit of a sarcastic joke. You asked before. I'm like totally dominating this conversation, but just really quickly, I'll let you know. Like you said, what are your influences? I know this is going to sound completely crazy, but one of my major influences in terms of creative work on this game was The Watchmen.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, the satirical, the satire of it.
It's a twisted universe that's a little bit different than ours.
Well, I'm with you. I'm a comic reader, so I'm with you.
Right. I have first printings sitting in my like on
Me,
bags of
me too. I do too.
Cool. That's rad. So yeah, first printings Dark Knight, first printings Ronin, all that stuff. So that was my era, that Baxter paper, like bitchin', like, era of collecting comics. So Watchmen was so influential, and it was like, and Sean and I were both into it, and it was like, so creatively we would twist history slightly to make it funny, right, and interesting. But if you look at the dialogue, he talks about the characters, they're vigilantes, they're auto vigilantes.
Right. Got it.
And
it's
what
like,
they were is they were the car driving equivalent of the Watchmen.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so Torque Daisy, Firefly, Spitfire, they're all dead, Groove. Like when he says that at the beginning, like he's talking about, and you remember how the comedian gets killed? And that's how the beginning of it starts, is that there's someone killing the Watchmen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Somebody was killing the auto vigilante.
Oh, wow. I would never have pulled that influence, but now it all makes sense.
Yeah, we didn't hit that on the nose, right? And again, it was just we were ripping it off because it was cool. But
but that's the perfect kind of influence, right? You don't you don't want to wear it on your sleeve, but
so Sean and I remember I'm like, Sean, we need like terrain, the different kinds of terrain, and Sean and the team went out and we're like, okay, like different types of terrain that's slippery, like the side of the road is different from the blacktop, and then off into the desert is different from that, so that the team could go and use tools, and he made these amazing tools so we could lay it out. So your question was like originally, how did we make it? I mean, Sean, talk about the tools. You guys made the most amazing tools for the design team, like amazing. That I remember, like, do that, like lay the guys out. So these guys will start over here and they'll come over the rise, and then they'll have speed, and then there'll be this turning. Anyway, Sean, you tell us about it.
There was a tool that we developed. I remember Zack was like, I need control. We need to be able to iterate on these maps. And it was a terrain map. And we had heard about a technology where you could paint a bitmap and use the RGB values of particular pixels to represent the height. And so we developed a prototype, I remember, where we were able to craft this in a way that we could literally paint a top-down view of the terrain with a grayscale that was highest point to lowest point, feed it to the system, and then Julio's terrain would literally render this. And then on top of it, we could lay splines for the roads, and then we could put markers on the terrain in order to represent the different, like the gas station or these different physical and highly destructible structures and things like that. We could do placement of the cars, and then do all of the mission design was done through an objective system that was all script based. So we had total control over primary, secondary, tertiary objectives, the actions, we had an AI system, a state based machine for each individual car that could be configured. And so with Dave White and myself and a couple of the guys had put early versions of this, and we just kept refining over time. It actually enabled us to create the multiplayer version of Interstate 76, where you could go in, and we were able to kind of make these tools available for end users so that they could craft their own. And that was one of the most exciting dimensions of the product. I don't know, you guys were having trouble getting the single player version, but the multiplayer version, which still runs today, apparently there's a fan group that's got a server up and you can go in and play, but allows for complete customizability of the terrain and placement of the enemies and scripting of specific events and stuff. So as Zack said, I mean, that was sort of the heyday back then, because you couldn't go to an asset store and pull shit down. You had to build all this stuff from scratch. And so it was just amazing.
That is amazing. I love that the tools came up organically, and that Zack was bringing up how amazing they were, and that we also have the person on who can talk about the specifics of it too. You mentioned before, Sean, the multiplayer too, which we didn't get to play, but also was, I think, a surprising element of this. And like you said, I mean, as we were playing, of course, because it's on GOG, but it's not super readily available beyond that. But
And it's not particularly well supported by GOG.
Yeah,
unfortunately, it's hard to get it to run.
Yeah, unfortunately, but in that search, there's forums still out there that are active. There's people still talking about the game all these many years later, and even
I would say every 6 months some fan contacts me.
Yes, that's amazing. See, that is why we're playing this for the podcast. And on the Discord too, when we brought up we were playing it, people there in the community, in our community, knew about it too, right? And we get email. We got at least one email where the person's like, "Thank goodness you're playing this. This is what this game was, was influential for me." And but the tools like that, again, as a level designer, the tools and ironically, I have on this podcast one of my biggest partners in crime in that, because Brett would be the one to build those tools for us. So, and that's why we're doing this podcast together, because we've done so much together. But all the things that you were just saying, Sean, are things that
you guys have
Brett would have to worry about and figure out how to do for us. So it's like a weird circular thing happening here. But I'm sure Brett was having flashbacks on some of that, because Starfighter was a lot of that.
State machine based AI, definitely.
Finite state machine.
Yeah.
That completely blew my mind when we were trying to figure out how we could. I mean, we had a very basic version of that in Mech 2, but it certainly we knew that for 76 we were going to need to do something that was far more advanced, because these guys had to react to, they had their overall objectives that they were trying to accomplish. There was mission, there was the overall state of the mission that they had to pay attention to, and you had the player who was like could completely mess things up in terms of how they would position themselves or what they would do. And so that FSM system was like, it was mind blowing when we first got the early version up. And then I remember that served as a really important springboard. Actually, after I left Activision, I got recruited by Jordan Weissman, who ran FASA. FASA got bought by Microsoft, and those guys all ended up in Redmond. And then fast forward a couple of years, we were on MechWarrior 4, and he was like, "I need you to come up here and help us with finite state machine system." So we went up, and I remember literally like bringing all the knowledge we had and the advancements we had made on 76, and that was the basis for Mech 4's finite state machine.
Wow. Yeah, it's also, and I know we're probably going to wind down here, right, Brett?
We're almost at an hour.
We're getting, we have a few minutes, but the interesting thing about, I super appreciate you both coming on and having the partnership here, which I can just hear through the microphone, which is so amazing, especially after all these years. But it's interesting to hear the MechWarrior 2 history portion kind of partnered, paired with the Interstate 76, because we kind of knew, we could feel, and I've always felt like that Interstate 76 was trailblazing in some interesting ways, and you're enumerating them here. But the fact that it was coming off of something that was kind of was in trouble and needed to ship and did ship and was well received, and again kind of put that era of Activision on the map. But then you were able to kind of continue trailblazing in I-76 separately and do these sort of things on your own terms, I guess, if you will. Obviously, it sounds like it was challenging as well, and there's a lot of things to learn. But Zack, your point about the mission structure versus some of the competitors out there, and you brought up, obviously, X-Wing TIE Fighter, sort of notoriously well-known. Neither of us worked on those games, but we had, again, Totally Games, Larry Holland on to talk about them. Notoriously sim games with a good story, to be reductive, right?
Right.
And that was also rare, right? Wing Commander started doing more of it later, but I do think X-Wing and TIE Fighter kind of started that, like, because otherwise it was like Falcon and like these very hardcore sims.
Yeah.
But Interstate 76 had an identity. It had a character, even beyond Star Wars, that was very special. So yeah, thank you to both of you and the team. 12 people or 13 people was a good tidbit too. Holy cow.
Yeah. And they had to rewrite the engine.
They had to, let's hit that home a couple times. Like,
oh my goodness, yeah.
So it's funny that you say that was a secret, and that you didn't reveal that. We've had because we've played Fallout 1 on the podcast, and we had Tim Kaine and oh my gosh,
Leonard Boyarsky.
Leonard Boyarsky, and then we played XCOM and had Julian Gallopon.
Oh my God.
Both of those projects were similar in that they were kind of like, and not that you guys were flying under the radar, but they were kind of in their own little, kind of track.
Yeah.
And making decisions that they kind of weren't really sharing all the time about what they were doing, but through the miracles of game development, it became classics. So anyway, it's just I think it's a common theme we've heard from time to time, because I love the pitch story too, where you're like, you came out of there saying, we're just going to do this game.
He says, do 9 more pitches. We're saying, no way.
No way.
We're stopping here. We got the one. Pump the brakes.
You know it sometimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, when there's the passion behind the idea, and you had your influences that you were coming in, and the music, was telling you a lot too. And I mean, you got to go with that. I mean, we also heard from that about, with Alex Garden, is that one of the biggest regrets and learnings of his life is when he didn't stick with his gut on the sequel to Homeworld, and they didn't get to make what they knew was the right thing to make. Because he was new to it, and he was like, they're telling me we had this big success, we got to double down and do more of that. And they had a much grander vision that would have been another 5 years ahead of everybody else, had they pulled it off. So definitely a sort of a moment of regret. So I'm glad you stuck to your guns, as it were.
There is one little announcement I would like to make just at the end as we wrap this up.
Oh no!
You ready?
I'm ready.
Sean knows what I'm about to say, I think, right? I'm making a car game.
Wait, for real?
Yeah.
Oh yes. Another world exclusive.
That's yes. You heard it here
2 in 1 podcast.
It is not a sequel to the game we've been talking about. I don't have those rights, but it is a car game, and I'll let you guys know more as it starts to shape up.
Please do. Yes, yeah. Plug. Yeah, I mean that's definitely want people to plug stuff at the end for sure, because we do have listeners.
And like I said, you guys hit on this before. I've been away. I've been kind of doing e-commerce stuff, and I've been doing VR stuff and mindfulness stuff, and other things, but I've a couple of my long-term colleagues have said, Zack, it's time, you got to get back into this business and do a AAA thing. And so I've pitched it to Sean, so he knows a little bit about what I'm doing. But it's secret right now, but it will be not so secret soon.
We will be big fans and supporters. So that's great to hear, Zack. And yeah, it's hard to get out, huh? I tried too, and then they brought me back. In fact, it was Sean's fault. It was Sean's fault to some degree. So, so I hear you. Well, yeah, we're happy you're coming back then. I mean, be careful what you wish for, but
I know.
You know what you're getting into. So
I've been making dog products, and we just make them and they sell, right? So it's not hard. Right? It's like
exactly. There's always dogs. They have needs.
They always got to pee.
It's like, why do I have to keep doing this? Why do I have to keep banging my head against that wall? Yeah.
But the creative side, and you clearly are a very creative individual, as Sean has said, and you've proven here. So I think the world will want more. So thanks to you both for being on. I want to be respectful of your time. Are there any final moments?
We're gonna say there any, or also tell us a little bit about what you're up to as well, Sean, so that folks know what you're doing.
We developed a platform called LiveAware, which is it's a tool for game developers to allow them to effortlessly capture play experiences and player commentary, and then the system automatically analyzes and presents back that feedback so that dev teams can make better games, and they can do it faster and more, including their audience in the whole process. And so it was really born out of a lot of these hard lessons through the years of working in a silo and not getting enough feedback and not getting enough time with real players as we built. And my business partner, David Bergers, who Tim worked with at 343 for years, we kind of looked out in the industry to find tools that would help, and a lot of them were geared toward UX, researchers and community managers and things like that. And so we wanted to build a tool that was for dev teams they could use kind of from the earliest stages all the way through. So LiveAware is out, and if any of your listeners are interested, go to liveaware.io and sign up for a free trial.
Cool.
And
Yeah,
go to doggylon.com so your dog can shit on a piece of grass.
Exactly. Man, what a journey you've been on, Zach.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, having us, guys. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Super fun reminiscing. Always great to hear from Sean, and we always pick up our conversation like there's never been any time past.
Yeah, if there's one thing that we're happy about is we got you two connected again on air, so everyone can listen to the reunion. So that's awesome.
By the way, how do we get in contact with Julio? How do we get to Julio Jimenez?
I know, and we got to get Dan Stanfill in here.
We'll do a follow up. And Tim, I didn't know about Tim Morton, so I'm actually I'll slack him and say, hey, guess what? I just did.
He's probably got some great stories on to share.
Such a cool person as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, and we could. These interviews are always like we could keep going because I know you both have more stories clearly. So, but yeah, we'll be respectful of your time and yeah, thanks for coming on for this awesome game.
Thank you guys very much.
Welcome back from the break. That was I'm really glad you were able to connect with Sean. You'd mentioned that over the course of us playing it, like, oh yeah, I know somebody, we should get him on. And then you had all the trouble playing the game, so I was like, well, maybe we're not going to do that. But we ended up making it work.
Yeah, Sean did listen to the episode, so he heard about all that stuff, and he obviously was bummed, but it was too good to not to get him on, so I thought we still had to do it. And yeah, I didn't even want to bring up the bug to these two anyway. It would seem like wasted minutes, but full disclosure, to be honest, one of the reasons I wanted to play Interstate 76 from the beginning was because I knew I could get Sean on, and Sean.
Okay.
To speak, not only because it's a great game and I know it had such a big influence on things, but also because, and again, I didn't want to say this while he was here, but he is more of I don't know if you can tell from the interview and kind of how he was carrying himself, but he's a pretty humble person. And he is much more of a force in the industry than I think, really came off. And I just felt like he was somebody who needed to be on because he has really been. He's not to be too cheesy, but he's touched a lot of people's lives. I think over the years, I learned a lot from him at Crystal. He's a great leader. Of course, I don't know Zack until this one, so I can't speak to Zack. But Sean's always spoken really highly of him, and I know they were good partners. So yeah, it was just great to have him on, and I know that Sean has always been really, really proud of Interstate 76, which he should be.
Yeah, he should be. Yeah.
So I'm glad.
I really enjoyed the game.
Things.
So
yeah.
Well,
and it stands out, as we talked ad nauseum about. It stands out in this genre.
Yeah,
I don't even know if people would even call it a sim, on the surface. But
I wouldn't have known back then it was a sim game,
right?
Because I was really taken in by the just it being different, and we didn't talk about it, but one of the things I thought about is like they had gone from this one TTRPG kind of based product, and at that time, because this was right when I was, I'd been in grad school, but the internet had just become a thing, and
wow, you're old.
Yeah, well, for me anyway, it was I had my Cradle computer, and the thing that was exploding at the time was inventive tabletop RPGs. It was like the first wave of stuff that wasn't first way that I remember, because I had access to like the internet, so I could actually go find this stuff. But all kinds of just weirder stuff. And alternate history was a big part of it. There was I can remember something called Castle Falkenstein, which I think was an alternate history thing. There were a bunch of these kind of alternate history stuff. So it was actually, for people who knew role-playing games at the time, it probably doesn't seem that strange to think, well, we'll do an alternate history game, video game. But those weren't common at the time either, so it's just I guess you could argue like secret weapons of the Luftwaffe or something are sort of alternate history.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
They're more kind of fantasy, right? Whereas this is literally, just totally different. Like that's kind of like German air. What if German air, air power was like just really superior? It's kind of a fantasy thing, and not a hugely like there's a whole story to it, right? Although I guess the manual has a lot, not in the game, I guess is what I'm saying. But anyway, it did strike me while we were talking. I didn't want to waste minutes on it, but it's
it was of an era. It fit into the era, and But I mean, that's part of the point. Part of the thing we try to do is put things in context for their time, and because there's definitely plenty of listeners didn't play, nor will they play, or didn't at the time know about this, or weren't born.
Jeez. Oh, wow. Okay. No, just go ahead. Here, I'll take this knife out. So a great conversation as always. I was really happy to get a chance to hear them talk, and like you said, they clearly had a lot of rapport. It was they were picking right up where they left off. It felt like, and that's a great thing to see. And there are lots of relationships that are forged by that kind of fire and respect, and maybe someday we'll have something like that. So,
wow, that's almost you've been workshopping that or something.
I'm over here bleeding from that. Half our audience wasn't even born comment. I had to come back. All right, well, let's move on to the outro. We don't normally read email here on our interview episodes. We do have a fun one about your misapprehension of how certain achievements work, but we'll get to that next week. You can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com. And we love, of course, to have your reviews on whatever platform you use. We like to read them on the air. Go ahead and let us know. If you don't put it into iTunes, those ones I do actually find. We're on the web at devgameclub.com, and you can find my co-host twitching at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Are we going to be going back to the Minecraft realm now that you once again have access? Is that the plan?
That's a good question. I haven't talked to the folks about it, but we did have, for those who didn't see it or don't know, but we had a great group outing, I guess I'll call it.
That's a good way to describe it. I watched some of it. Yeah.
So Moores and Lost Lake and I went in, I'm back on the realm, and Lost Lake has some things that he's trying to find in the Nether, and I haven't been in the Nether for probably a decade. And to his urging, we went in with no gear and we just explored, and it was terrifying. And there's some other terrifying things they showed me with the warden and stuff. So that game still amazes me. I still think it's one of the most, movie notwithstanding, the buzz is happening currently, but separate from that nonsense, I just still think that game is just a revelation. And those two specifically, Moores and Lost Lake, are continuing their farming adventures.
They are quite creative. They hook up some pretty big machinery to generate all sorts of things.
It's so cool, and they give tours every time we play. The other anecdote I'll share is while we were streaming that night, Kaon and Baron both bought and downloaded Minecraft for the first time, and apparently are going to start playing it for the first time.
Well, Kaon's in the realm, so
yeah, exactly. So I hope they don't just go to Lost Lakeville and Mooresville and just have unlimited resources. Well, trash it, but also as I've said many times, I think for me one of the cool things about the game is the survival part. So I don't want them to skip that. But hopefully they see the magic that I see.
Yeah. Well, you can learn more about that both at twitch.tv/Tim Longer Jr. with JR at the end, and on the Discord, where there is a separate channel that is dedicated to Minecraft realm life. So you can find that there. Or, lots of other interesting discussions. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, lots of stuff, plenty of gifts by Mark Garcia. Have fun polishing your paint jobs this week, and good night.
Good night.